welcome to another episode of the Caroline Glick Show. As I'm sure most of you know, probably the largest institution or the largest anti-Semitic institution in the world is none other than the United Nations. And it seems like a day doesn't go by where there's another episode in the UN that just proves that contention without any question. And I think it's important to highlight some of the latest developments that have been happening at the UN, and I could think of nobody better to discuss this with than my old friend and colleague, Professor Anne Bayefsky. Anne Bayefsky is the director of the Touro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust, she's the director of the Touro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust and the Presidents of Human Rights Voices. She is one of the leading experts on the UN and its machinations, particularly as related to hatred of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And so first of all, thanks so much, Anne. I think this is the first time that I've had you on the show. I'm so glad to have you aboard.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
All right. Well, so there were a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you about. The first one that really caught my eye was that the Biden administration has decided that it's time for the United States of America to rejoin UNESCO, the UN's education and cultural organization. It's been one of the leading lights, sort of the tip of the spear of UN anti-Semitism for decades. The UN left UNESCO under the Trump administration. I think it was after they said that there's no Jewish temple in Jerusalem, and that the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron was a Muslim site, and they ignored the fact that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rebecca and Leah were the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the Jewish people. And then a couple of years ago, they announced that the ancient Roman city of Battir is a World Heritage Site because of the ancient terraced architecture, but they failed to mention that it was actually a Jewish city and it was the headquarters of the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Roman Empire. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that they've been doing, for decades. And the U.S. left UNESCO because of that, and also because they recognized Palestine as a member state, and there's a U.S. law that bars the United States from being a member of a UN organization that recognizes or accepts Palestine as a member nation, and that was the reason that the Trump administration left UNESCO, and Israel happily left right after America did. So can you talk a little bit about how you assess this decision on the part of the Biden administration?
Well, if I may just back up and give you kind of an overview, the United Nations is a $50 billion a year annual enterprise. And to underestimate its reach and its significance is a terrible mistake. It gets into every classroom. Its social media presence is ubiquitous. And the United States has actually a small voice compared to the amount of money that it pours into the organization.
How much does America give it?
It's on the hook for about 22% of the regular budget, but by the time it kicks in all the extra budgetary, it's anywhere between $10 and $15 billion a year. So the fact is that in the General Assembly, the U.S. has one vote of 193. In the top human rights body of the Human Rights Council, it's 1 out of 47. So we don't have the votes to prevail in the main policy-making forum of the UN. And yet, the United States taxpayer keeps footing the bill. So what you have is this strange situation where it's churning out things which are incompatible with American interests and values, and yet we take it on the cheek. We are on the chin turn the other cheek. And the UNESCO situation is one of this organization churning out dozens of resolutions only on Israel, clearly antithetical to American interests and values. And as early as the early 1990s, on a bipartisan basis, the Congress said that any UN body that admits the so-called State of Palestine, or at the time the PLO, as a full member state will be defunded by the United States. And the point is that the Palestinians were trying to use the organization as to do an end run on peace, on negotiations, on a settlement of nonviolent settlement of any kind. And the United States understood
because if Palestine is recognized as a full member of the United Nations, and it effectively is already a state as far as the international community is concerned, and then whether Israel agrees to it or not is sort of unimportant. Is the thinking, right? Is that how it's to avoid having to make peace with Israel?
That's right. The point is to avoid negotiations which require recognition of the other. They don't want to recognize a Jewish state, full stop, and they don't want, therefore, sit down and actually negotiate an agreed upon outcome. So the UN is their vehicle to accomplish that goal, and especially because American influence in the United Nations is much diminished as opposed to its status as a obviously the leading democracy in the world today. So as a consequence, we have 30 years on the books that this is going to be the policy of the United States, backing up its full support for the Oslo Accords and the Middle East Roadmap, which was sanctioned by the Security Council and so on, to insist on negotiations and a negotiated outcome. So along comes UNESCO in 2011 and admits Palestine, so-called, or State of Palestine, as they renamed it, a full member state. So the Obama administration, much to their chagrin, had no chance other than following U.S. law and defunding it. While they defunded it, they remained as members. As a consequence, the annual arrears kept going up. They kept having a bill for being a member. They lost their vote, but they were still a member. And eventually, this arrears ballooned over $500 million. Over 500 is around $600 million. And so the Trump administration decided to stop the bleeding and get off it altogether. After all, it was adopting all these resolutions antithetical to American interests. As you went through, suddenly Hebron belongs to Palestine, and it diminished Israel's relationship to parts of Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. So Trump withdraws, the arrears stop accruing, and now the Biden administration wants to rejoin. How do they do that? The law doesn't allow them to. So in December, literally at the very last minute, they snuck in to the U.S. Appropriations Act an ability to waive the law. And Congress didn't do its job in terms of oversight, but they were shoved to the side. And this thing, as I say, was a very last-minute maneuver in terms of the hold of the American Appropriations Act. And so the waiver was adopted. And or the ability of the president to waive. So what's happened is now everybody's waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's what's happened just last week. They've announced that they're going to use the waiver and admit Palestine, rejoin UNESCO in full. Now, the most important thing to know about it is I believe, the death knell of a negotiated outcome. Now that so-called Palestine thinks it can join UN organizations, agencies, bodies without having any price to pay, not only having any price to pay, the American taxpayer is now going to pay $600 million and another $75 annually for the, despite the recognition, I think that they will see it as a victory and no reason to move forward on negotiations.
Well, I guess that'll also have an impact, though, of course, on other UN agencies and their willingness to admit Palestine as a full member. If this is a test case, I mean, the Americans say, and this goes to your point about the Americans only having one vote on all of these boards and having so little influence, and makes you wonder what the source of influence really is, because China also only has one vote. But one of the things that became very evident during the COVID-19 period is that it had extraordinary influence over the World Trade Organization. And here, the Americans are using the Chinese as the justification for returning to UNESCO by saying, well, we're losing all of this cultural power or cachet because we're not a member of UNESCO, and we're losing it to the Chinese. And so if we want to fight China, we have to be in UNESCO. And I saw the Foundation for Defense of Democracy posted a paper about it and said, look, this isn't the way to fight Chinese cultural influence. And so there are two kind of aspects to that, I guess, that I'd like your more educated view on it, which is that, more educated than myself, which is that why do you think it is that China seems to exert such a larger influence on the UN than the United States? And the second question is do you think that there's validity to the American claim that by rejoining UNESCO, they're going to advance the U.S. interest of competing with China on the international cultural and educational front?
The China story is a fig leaf. I think that there are so many other ways to try to change the dynamic of Chinese influence. Rejoining UNESCO is just small potatoes in that regard. China exerts enormous influence, for one thing, because it considers itself a developing country, so that it is a member of the largest voting bloc in the United Nations, the non-aligned movement, and the G77, which is approximately 130 countries. The non-aligned movement is approximately 117, 120. So you've got China masquerading as this underdog and therefore throwing its weight around within the main voting bloc, within the main power nexus in the organization. The United States is on the out. The European Union and Canada, Australia, etc. There's a much smaller group of countries. And of course, the largest single voting bloc within the so-called non-aligned or developing world is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC. So Islamic states basically push around the developing world, and the United States watches on the sidelines while the resolutions keep coming. They keep losing the votes, and they pay up anyway. So that's the dynamic. Chinese influence is facilitated in that context, and nobody's
Incidentally, do you know what percentage of the UN budget the Chinese foot?
No. It's very much smaller than the United States. And the exact number escapes me, but for the large proportion of the UN budget is paid for by the world's democracies, of which, of course, China is not one of them. China is, however, a member of the UN Human Rights Council, which I know we're going to get to the Human Rights Council,
Right.
but
We're about to move to the Human Rights Council, but just to sort of, close this issue. So the UNESCO thing basically is the United States saying, well, we need to join UNESCO, rejoin UNESCO, waive the law's requirements that it not recognize the state of Palestine. We need to rejoin UNESCO because we have to confront China. This is really probably not going to add or detract from America's capacity to compete with China, not on the cultural or educational or scientific front, and certainly not on any other front. But be that as it may, what it does do is it sort of ends it ends any deterrent effect of U.S. law on UN agencies from accepting the fictional state of Palestine as a full voting member, because the United States is saying they're not gonna sanction those institutions, at least for now.
well, the waiver says for the moment it's UNESCO only. And then when we have to look to other things. But obviously nobody believes the United States anymore. That's the trouble with doing this kind of thing, is that it destroys one's credibility. If you don't enforce the law, nobody's going to take you seriously when you do it again. So yes, it's clearly an incentive to other UN bodies who will now think that the Americans just don't have what it takes.
And then the other thing is what you were saying is that, and then the last aspect to this, of course, is that it, to the extent there ever was a chance in 2023 for the Palestinians to agree to a negotiated settlement of their dispute with Israel that would lead to peace and, from their perspective, Palestinian statehood in the context of a peace with Israel, well, they now know that they can get international recognition of statehood without making peace with Israel. That's another signal that this sends very clearly.
Absolutely. And that is why this rejoining UNESCO is such a catastrophe for the point of view of any kind of, not just negotiation, but peace. So it's, I think people don't recognize this is not just a small step, one organization, even if you didn't care about over $500 million, at the very least, it upends decades of American foreign policy.
That's a big deal. All right, and now let's move to the Human Rights Council. You wrote an article for the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs that just came out this week. That's titled "Pele's Latest Propaganda Crusade Against Israel: The June 2023 UN Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry Report." So, talk to us a little about what is a Commission of Inquiry, who is Navi Pillay, and why is this another anti-Semitic onslaught on the part of the UN Human Rights Council?
Well, I'd venture to say that this latest inquiry or body or endeavor by the UN Human Rights Council is the most egregious, outrageous, and anti-Semitic operation in the history of the Human Rights Council.
That's an amazing statement. Wait. Because actually, before we even get into this, let's just back up for everybody in our audience who doesn't sort of know the backstory of the Human Rights Committee or Commission, whatever it's called. So in the past, there was a UN Human Rights Council, right? And then
commission that was in the 1940s at the beginning, and it went to 2006. And after that...
Right, and the Bush administration shut it down.
It changed names. And other than that, there was nothing reformed about it, except for the fact that it...
Wait. Let me just give it really short. So what happened was, it's this commission. It's this totally anti-Semitic institution. The Bush administration under George W. Bush finally got sick of it, and they shut it down. I think that was when John Bolton was the UN ambassador, right? And so they shut it down, and they tried to form a new body that wasn't going to be anti-Semitic. But then, lo and behold, unbelievable as it may sound, the UN newly reformed, not anti-Semitic Human Rights Council became anti-Semitic. So now I see it's called the Commission again because they just want to go full circle, or whatever.
No.
So
the Human Rights
wait, let me just,
Council.
one last thing. Well, I'm going to hand it over to you in a second. Let me just hand it over to you in 1 second. The Bush administration saw what happened, and even though they were instrumental in forming this new committee, they decided not to join. The Obama administration joined it and then left it, and I think they joined it again. You can tell me if I'm wrong. And then Trump took the United States out of it. And then I think one of the first things that Biden did was go back to the Human Rights Commission. So is that about right, or committee or council or whatever? But so now America's back in. Now fix what's necessary, and other than that, just go on and explain how this thing is worse than every other thing that they've done, because they've done some pretty unbelievable things.
Okay, so just to be quite clear about it, there was a commission. It was created at the beginning of the UN. It went from 1947 to 2006, called the Human Rights Commission. Kofi Annan got into trouble for oil for food scandal, where, skimming things off the top. And he offered up reform of the Human Rights Commission as trying to sort of save his legacy. So they created a Human Rights Council. The United States understood that this so-called reform was silly, because what it didn't change the one thing that mattered, and that is that the membership should actually have to protect human rights. So therefore, the United States didn't join it. The president decided not to join it from the outset in 2006. It was called a council. As I say, that changed its name. It went from 53 members to 47 members. Why does that matter? Because the number of democratic countries actually went down. Membership on the Human Rights Council is actually, the number of fully free democracies on the Human Rights Council today is 30%. Okay, that's where we are. The Islamic countries hold the balance of power. They hold 70% of the African and Asian regional groups, which themselves are the majority. So that's where the locus of power resides. So the Human Rights Council started off, and then the Obama administration, the United States voted against its creation, didn't join it. First thing that Obama did within the first couple of months was to announce the United States would become a member, joined it. Then there's a term limits. Long story short, even though Trump had won the election, the United States ran for election, and or at least the election was coming up. The Obama administration decided he wanted to keep the United States on, run for election. So when Trump became president, he was stuck with the membership on the Human Rights Council. So it took a year and a half, a little too long, but eventually gets off of it, largely because of its anti-Israeli positions. So the United States is not a member. The first thing the Biden administration does as a foreign policy move is to go right back on, stand for election. Of course, they got elected. So here we are as full members of this body for one vote out of 47. They then in 2021, the result of the conflagration in May of 2021, which I think there's evidence.
Guardian of the wall between Israel and Hamas.
Yes, and I actually think there's evidence to show that it was in part a result of setting up the idea of this commission inquiry, that the violence itself was not disconnected to thinking that it could be used and abused at the UN in terms of creating this commission of inquiry. So at the end of May 2021...
Wait, let me just back up 1 second, because there is the permanent agenda item of the Human Rights Council, right, which is always to condemn Israel. That was one of the first orders of business that it adopted. Isn't that correct? So that every session they condemn Israel. Is that how it works?
There's a lot of things wrong with the Human Rights Council. Among them is the permanent agenda item. A handful of agenda items, and every single agenda every time they meet, they have the agenda item on Israel bashing. It's the only country that's subject to this. All other countries are under a different agenda item. So there's one for everybody else, and there's one for Israel alone. So yes, they have that problem. They have a special rapporteur, a so-called expert who has a permanent mandate to investigate Israel from, in perpetuity, which is unlike all the other special rapporteurs, which have end dates. So, but all of that aside, they create a commission of inquiry at the end of May, saying it's a result of this, days of this conflagration. And this commission of inquiry was extraordinary, completely unprecedented. The amount of money it has, the scope is from time immemorial, according to its chair. It can deal with anything sort of related to the Arab-Israeli conflict, discrimination, oppression, racism. It's focused on criminal prosecution, and it has an enormous budget, about $5 million a year in perpetuity. It has no end date, and it has 3 people on it, and those 3 people were then appointed by the Human Rights Council's president. They have one shared thing in common, and that is they're anti-Israel to begin with. That's why they were appointed. They have this record of discrimination and demonization of Israel, and they named the inquiry the Independent Inquiry. So there's nothing independent about them. And having done that, they understood that this unprecedented, unlimited in time and scope mandate was really a fairly dramatic change in the way the Human Rights Council, even the Human Rights Council, was doing business. And so what happened? Well, they produced a first report, and they had a series of clearly anti-Semitic remarks. One of them, Chris Sidoti from Australia, belittles victims of anti-Semitism and say, accusations of anti-Semitism are thrown around like rice at a wedding. That's what he tells the Human Rights Council. Then, in the summer of 2022, another member, Milu Kotari from India, says, he tells a webinar that the Jewish lobby controls social media. Then the chair, Nave Pillay, who was a former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, comes to both of their defense. And in October, she tells the UN General Assembly that accusations of anti-Semitism are always used as a diversion. So we've got these 3 people who are not only, who are just clearly giving voice to classic anti-Semitic tropes, as it's called, in place, not worried about their having to be removed. There were various countries that called for their removal. Nothing happened. The UN took no responsibility. And so then what happened? They spent the last year having secret meetings, convening hearings by invitation only. And the only people invited to participate were those who were prepared to engage in the demonization of the state of Israel. Now, myself and a group of other organizations decided, we're going to change this dynamic. We're going to put in, and we did, we submitted, they called for submissions. They expected nothing else but anti-Israel stuff, and so-called Palestinian narrative. We put in over 5 million unique submissions to the United Nations.
5 how many?
5 million. Over 5 million unique submissions. I know because I recorded sending every single one of them. So I have it on record. And what did Pillay do with it? She said in her first, a year ago, she said, well, those are all in her words, those are pro-Israel submissions. They were both.
And they're only supposed to investigate alleged Israeli crimes. Is that what it is? What is the commission of inquiry inquiring into?
in theory, it's supposed to be all violations of human rights in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict. So no, it doesn't say Israel only. And so she said that they weren't, she didn't look at them yet. Then we put in another over 200,000 in the summer of last year. And then they produced another report, which has just come out in the last week and a half. And this report says, well, they looked at 21 submissions. And I'm thinking, well, what are they talking about, 21 submissions? What happened to all the other ones? And it turns out that they have a cutoff date. Anything received prior to November of 2022 is out of order. They're not considering it. So she said she didn't have time to do it, all the millions, in June of 2021. And this year, a year later, they're too late. So it's a game. It's a very bad game, very despicable, evil game. And so I think it's really important to find out, to dig down, what does this report say that's about to be on Tuesday of this week. They will present their report. What does it say? Number one, it says it doesn't just go after Israel. It's all of Israel's, and using its words, supporters. All of Israel's supporters, non-governmental organizations, people in the United States, Europe, wherever they are committing criminal activities contrary to international humanitarian and human rights law, by being insufficiently supportive of the Palestinian rights, which, how do they define Palestinian rights? They talk about the Nakba of 1948, the creation of the state of Israel through ethnic cleansing. And they reinvent, a false history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and then say any NGO, any supporter that is of Israel's attempt to defend itself, both militarily and politically, is somehow at fault. So they've declared war not just on Israel, but Israel's supporters around the world. And the other incredible thing they did is appropriate to themselves the capacity to define anti-Semitism or redefine anti-Semitism. They said the trouble with Israel and all those Jews or Zionists who support the state of Israel have reframed those are their words, reframed anti-Semitism to mean any Israel criticism. Well, of course, nobody says that, and anybody watches the streets of Israel and reads the media, etc., will know full well that Israel's a vibrant democracy. And yet they took aim with the so-called IRA definition, which talks about the demonization and delegitimization of Israel. And so...
Wait, so they're saying that the people who think that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism are criminals? Is that effectively what they're saying? That by saying that the Jews don't have a right to self-determination in their homeland, that's, or by saying that Jews do have a right to self-determination in our homeland, that we're criminals?
We're violating the law. And in terms of criminality, they talk specifically about the International Criminal Court. And they say, for example, in one place, that they're now going to investigate pilots and employees of El Al for flying, for engaging in a flight between Israel and France to remove someone that Israel strongly believed was violating Israeli law and deport him to France. So they've talked about BDS. They're all for BDS. They expect other countries to participate in BDS. If you're anti-BDS, you're insufficiently supportive of the Palestinian rights, and therefore they can take fair aim directly at you. So the
So
scope.
I remember, wait, let me just ask you, I remember reading a couple of weeks ago that they were taking aim at the states in the United States that passed anti-BDS laws. Is that correct? Is that part of this initiative?
Yes, it is correct. They've said that all of American anti-BDS laws are violate human rights law, their idea of the law, in quotation marks. And
Because why?
because expressing yourself is, and because all you're doing is, the other side is just criticizing. They're not demonizing. They're not inciting to violence. They're simply, it casts BDS as some kind of sanguine expression of disappointment in Israel's behavior, but it's not. It's about the destroying the state of Israel militarily, politically, financially, and but they have redefined it as legitimate. So basically, it takes aim at the vast majority of American states and the American voting population, and appropriates to themselves this undeserved authority, which really, if we go full circle, takes us back to the United States, because the United States taxpayer is paying 22% of the bill of this inquiry, of this inquisition, of this anti-Semitic operations. And so there have been, the GOP has put, the Republican Party has put on paper the COI Elimination Act. It was in the Senate by Senator Tim Scott, and it was bipartisan in the last session. It's not been reintroduced to the Senate. I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why. The reason is because Senator Menendez is standing opposed to it. And the
Really?
Republican...
Is that surprising? I mean, I thought Senator Menendez was fairly pro-Israel.
Yeah, that is what people think. Senator Menendez is single-handedly standing in the way from the adoption of the COI Elimination Act that will defund it from... will defund it and discredit it. And the way he's doing that is because the Republicans control the House. Even last session, it was a bipartisan effort. Both Democrats, some Democrats, and Republicans understood the dangers of this commission of inquiry, the overt anti-Semitism of its members, its extraordinary power, and yet it can't get through the Senate. So some have given up hope. That's a mistake. They should get right back on the COI Elimination Act and make sure it's adopted, and make sure Senator Menendez understands, what constitutes anti-Semitism. If he didn't recognize it now, maybe he needs to be enlightened.
So when these things are going on, and I understand that when you look at the Biden administration's decision to waive law and to enable the United States to go back into UNESCO and continue paying its budget, etc. Still, I mean, this is quite extraordinary. This Commission of Inquiry's effort to redefine black and white, and have the Americans raised any objection to this officially? Is there any? How has the U.S. delegation been responding to this?
There are two answers to that question. One is yes, they have. There have been statements by the administration that they're opposed to the Commission of Inquiry. And tomorrow it's expected at or Tuesday, it's expected at the Human Rights Council that the United States will deliver a statement, as they did last year, on behalf of a group of countries objecting to the inquiry. But, when they're sitting there in the Human Rights Council legitimizing it as the world's leading democracy is somehow giving, a bona fides to the Human Rights Council to read a statement out, just doesn't do the job. Money where their mouth is. And the second aspect of it that's terribly important, I think, factor in is the International Criminal Court. The end game of the Commission of Inquiry is to criminalize the state of Israel, its defenders, its politicians, its judiciary, even the average person on the street, anybody who's served in the IDF, anybody who supports the state of Israel in any other kinds of way, did national service of other kinds, and anybody outside the state of Israel that has similar levels of similar kinds of support, or any kind of support.
What are they going to do? I mean, it's hard for me to get my brain around it. It's so vast and enormous. I mean, on the one hand, it sounds terrible, and on the other hand, what are they planning on doing? Bringing the entire population of world Jewry onto the dock? I mean, it's that. What exactly? It's so obscene and so over the top. It would seem, anyway, in its vile Jew hatred, that, I mean, it just directs. How is this going to have any real world implications for Israel? How is it going to have any real world implications for Jews in America, for pro-Israel, non-Jewish citizens in the United States and other countries in the world? Why should we care? I mean, it seems so absurd, this entire thing.
No, it's very real, and we make a terrible mistake to ignore it. What are they doing specifically? They're sending names, specific names of people to the International Criminal Court. In their hearings, they asked witnesses for photographs. If you've taken a photograph of a so-called settler, send them the pictures of anybody.
Hi, I'm a settler. Hi.
They accuse. They make wild statements that all settlers are aiming. In their terminology, in the report, all settlers are seeking to harm Palestinian children. It's full of blood libels. It's not. It has to be taken extremely seriously. And they've met with the International Criminal Court prosecutors a number of occasions. They're sending them these files day in and day out. They're secret. We don't know whose names are, but we can imagine that. Are they going to go for the big fish? Are they going to? The Palestinians have said continuously that Israel's leaders are like Putin, and as long as the ICC wants to go after, the prosecutor wants to go after Putin, he should also go after Netanyahu and the former. It's their equal opportunity. They don't really care what party you belong to. It's all fair game. So, by the way, Pillay has called Israel an apartheid state. Apartheid is a crime against humanity under the International Criminal Court. So they seek to go after Israelis of all kinds, and as I say, those outside for supporting, aiding, and abetting Israeli apartheid. That's where we're going with this. It's not a fiction of, it's not just, something over there way in the future. The prosecutor himself has written a letter to UN special procedures of the Human Rights Council, so-called experts, saying that he's moving along with the case against Israel and Israelis, and that was in the last couple of months. So no, this is definitely on the horizon. And what difference will it make? So what happens if they indict Israelis? Then what happens? The answer is that all of those countries which have ratified the Statute of the Rome Treaty, as it's called, are under an obligation to arrest them. So Israelis finding themselves in countries or politicians that are members of the International Criminal Court will, have to engage, in theory, in this pogrom. It's what it is. It's an international pogrom. It's a criminal pogrom launched by Nave Pillay, who was, it's important to remember who she is. She was the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She was the woman who was the leading champion of the Durban Conference, the racist anti-racism conference. She herself is actually from Durban, a native of Durban, South Africa. And she sponsored the second and third commemorations of the Durban Conference. She sat there with the Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, speaking about those ugly faces of Zionists behind him as he spoke, and everybody walked out, and she stayed put in the Durban 2009 review conference. And she was also the person, in many ways, behind the creation of the Goldstone inquiry, which accused Israel of the IDF of wantonly targeting Palestinian civilians. It was a blood libel. Goldstone retracted it, and Pillay made sure to repeat it. So that's the person that they hired to chair this commission of inquiry.
So let me just ask you, leaving America aside for a second, I mean, here is Israel getting gang raped by this commission and more broadly by the Human Rights Committee. I mean, we can talk about that as well. You know, they just...
The council, the committee is a different body altogether.
The council. And then, I mean, they just elected Iran to be the social forum chair, and the Iranians are hosting a 2-day exhibition on Iranian women's fashion. You know, this says they're killing women for not wanting to wear the regime, required fashion of covering their heads completely with a hijab. And, you know, they're executing political prisoners, more, on average, more than one a day. So, this is one of the vaunted leaders of the Human Rights Council committee.
Well, it's not on the council. Okay, go ahead.
Let me just finish. The point is, this is so off the chart bad. And, is there anything that Israel can be doing that it's not doing other than saying, you guys are bigots? I mean, what could Israel reasonably do, especially, the United States wants to just say, shame on you and keep paying the bills?
Well, unfortunately, if the United States lends credibility to these institutions, which it's doing also, the Biden administration is now re-engaging with the International Criminal Court, even though it poses a threat to American servicemen and women, as well as to Israelis.
What does that mean, it's engaging with the ICC? I mean, the United States has never ratified the ICC treaty.
Never ratified
the member of
it. It's supporting its processes and in the context of Putin. I mean, to back up for just a second, the human rights organizations are working very closely with the State Department and this is what Senator Menendez's line is, to analogize what happens to Israel to what happens to Russia on Ukraine. We have to be sure not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Israel's the price to be paid for making progress on multilateral interest in Putin's behavior in Ukraine. So that's what's happening. I think in terms of exposing that as a violation of first principles, which is, the last I heard, sending people to the back of the bus was not equal treatment, are a number of things. I think that since the non-governmental organizational world is now of such much more significance on the world stage, and that's why Pillay, by the way, is going after Israel's efforts to target specific non-governmental organizations. as engaged in illegality. So I think, so Israel is in part tied to influencing the United States, to convincing the United States that what's in their, not only Israel's interests, but in America's interests. And so it has to continue to do that. Anti-Semitism should not be in American interests. And yet the Biden administration has just put out an anti-Semitism, policy paper that talks about a definition, the nexus definition, and welcomes it, even though it says that, even though their definition says that anti-Zionism is not necessarily anti-Semitism. So we're really in a very difficult circumstance or situation. So that's number one. The second thing is the Jewish non-governmental organizations. Pillay and company accuse them of being coordinated. It's a coordinated attack, which is hilarious, because if you ever knew Jewish organizations, the last thing they tend to be is coordinated. But this time,
but on the other hand, the non-Jewish NGOs are coordinated in their assault on Israel. I mean, you can't deny that when Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch both put out reports almost at the same time accusing Israel of being an apartheid regime, that there's some level of collusion and cooperation here. So who cares if they did cooperate? I mean, what she's really alleging is that there's a Jewish conspiracy. I mean, that's what she's saying. When she says that they're coordinating, she's actually, she's resonating the anti-Semitic libel of a world Jewish conspiracy. That's what she's doing.
That's correct. And she actually has frequently used the word Jewish lobby herself, and, publicly. She talks like that. So the fact is that this so-called Jewish lobby, which is ineffective, doesn't either, in so many ways, should finally get its act together and understand.
We're the worst conspiracy in the whole world. We hate each other. We never talk to each other, and everybody tries to hog the credit for everything. Yeah.
So,
some conspiracy.
But if you ask me what we can do positively when the anti-Israel constabulary puts out some kind of a report or whatever, within 2 seconds they've got a list of so-called experts and numbers, thousands of names have now suddenly appeared as in support. So I do think that it's time to educate. This is not shmoom. This is not, the Hebrew acronym of who cares about the UN. It doesn't mean anything. It's a terrible mistake to underestimate how far this has gone, and the influence it has over the human rights world in the United States, in college campuses, and from the time you enter preschool, you're watching UN videos and so on. So we have to understand its significance, why it matters, the danger it causes or it represents. And we have to conceive of concrete methods that are well-researched, aren't just, that are clearly can be backed up by articles. And to get the message out there and to make our voices heard in Congress and around the world. By the way, I put this article on Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs today. It's available online, and I go through line by line the report. I point out the anti-Semitism, and so it's dense. It has an executive summary, but if you want the hard facts, so you can say to people, no, I'm not just engaged in wild conversation. I've presented it for you. Also, our website, humanrightsvoices.org, we've done the same thing. I am also on Twitter, but I mean, our website has all the links to Durban, to the Goldstone report, to the International Criminal Court attacks on Israel, and you can find it there. So educate yourself. Go out there and get involved, make a difference. It's really possible. Light a fire under the Jewish organizations. Stop. Call Senator Menendez's office. It's or Kevin McCarthy, and say, hey, where's the COI Elimination Act? Where's the United States on this? We can make a difference, but you have to get off your tuchus and do it.
Yeah, you're right. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult because one of the things about the UN that they're so good at is that they hide it all behind these bureaucratic sounding documents. And there are all of these alphabet soup organizations and commissions. I mean, there's one commission that I just heard, the UN Children in Armed Conflict Committee or something, and they have a blacklist, and they're thinking about putting Israel on it. I mean, it's endless. The amount of acts of aggression that the UN Secretariat, the various UN organizations are carrying out against the Jewish state and against its supporters, against its military forces, against its political leaders, it's mind-boggling. And then, and people just would say, well, I would just want to wash my hands out of the whole thing. But you're saying you just can't. They're too powerful. They have too much money. They have too much influence. They're ubiquitous in our world. And so we have to figure out a way both to educate ourselves from the mind-numbingly horrific acts of aggression that these UN agencies and the UN itself is carrying out against the Jewish state for clearly anti-Semitic reasons, because they're saying that there's something fundamentally illegitimate about the one and only Jewish state, that Jewish people alone have no right to national self-determination. They steal our history, they steal our culture, they steal our heritage, they give it to our sworn enemies who pretend that they're the native-born or the indigenous people, and that the Jewish people are not the descendants of the Jews of biblical times, when you have literally, a historical record that spans 3,500 years proving that it is, and then 2,000 years in diaspora, where every single synagogue worldwide, is a testament to the enduring and millennial tie of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. You cannot be a Jew without being tied to the land of Israel, because your identity becomes completely incomprehensible and stupid. So, I mean, the whole thing is an assault on Jewish peoplehood, on the erasure of Jewish history, of Jewish existence, for the purpose of annihilating the one and only Jewish state and dehumanizing and demonizing Jewish people and anybody who doesn't hate us. So I'll just say, I want to give you the last word, but on that note, I can just say that my name is Caroline Glick. That's Caroline with an I-N-E, not Carolyn with a Y-N. So if you're watching this show and you're in the UN human rights crap, I want you to spell my name properly, when you try to criminalize me because I'm a settler. And let's see what you got, because I got a lawyer. Her name is Professor Bayefsky, and she's going to be standing by me pro bono, right, Ann? When you put me up in the dock. So of course you'll be there with me, because you'll be criminalized because you defend Israel. So you'll be in trouble too. So I think it's very important. And Ann, I want to thank you very much, because anytime that I want to understand what's happening in the UN, I either read your latest article. You guys should follow her on Twitter, and you should follow Human Rights Voices. And I either read what you've just written, or I call you up and say, Ann, can you explain what's happening? And this woman is an encyclopedia of knowledge. So I congratulate you for your work, and I thank you for it. And what would be your parting thoughts about this disastrous travesty?
My parting thoughts on the top of it is what I call not anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. Is that all of this stuff that they do, which is clearly anti-Semitic, which the average American really understands that anti-Semitism is not okay, regardless of its origins and where it's coming from, left, right, and so on. Same with most Europeans. So the the other side understands that the definition of anti-Semitism stands between them and their ability to be anti-Semitic. And so that's why they're trying to delegitimize definitions of anti-Semitism that catch them out for who and what they are. And so don't fall into the trap of not anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. It is anti-Semitism, period, full stop. You'll recognize it. You'll see that it's a distortion of history, of truth, of reality. And I think it's important to use the terminology of anti-Semitism where it fits and not shy away from it. This is not just about Israel. It's about Jews collectively and all those who understand the tragedy of failing to stand by the Jewish people in their time of need. We're in that time of need. And I think that we have to make sure that we don't shrivel from the responsibility as Americans or as citizens of the world, period.
Okay, well, I thank you very much for coming on the show. And guys, you're not gonna find this information anywhere else. So you have to subscribe to the Caroline Glick Show on YouTube, on Rumble, or to jns.org to get my show and Jonathan Tobin and Wine with Adam and all the rest of it. So you gotta be subscribing. You gotta be getting this information when it comes out and sharing it far and wide, because these are issues that affect the lives not only of everybody in Israel, but of everybody in the region and everybody in the free world. So make sure you're staying tuned, and we will see you again next week on the Caroline Glick Show. Thanks so much, Anne, and thanks so much to all of you. Take care.